The moment I saw my daughter Celeste's car pull into the driveway, I felt it. That tightness in my chest that a mother learns to recognize. Not excitement, not joy. Something closer to dread wearing a familiar face. It was a Tuesday in late September. The maples along my street in Oakville were just starting to turn. That first flush of orange at the edges that always makes me think the trees are embarrassed about something. I'd been sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of Earl Grey and the crossword perfectly content. I hadn't seen Celeste in 4 months. She hadn't called to say she was coming. She never called anymore. I watched through the window as she got out of the passenger side, not the driver's side, I noticed, and a man I had never seen before climbed out from behind the wheel. Tall, dark jacket. He stretched like he owned the street, hands above his head, looking up at my house. The way someone looks at something they're appraising. I set my mug down. He walked around to the trunk and pulled out 2 large suitcases and a duffel bag. Celeste watched him without offering to help. Then she looked up toward the front door, spotted me through the glass, and waved like nothing in the world was unusual about this. Like she hadn't just arrived unannounced with a stranger and 3 pieces of luggage on a Tuesday afternoon. I opened the door before she could knock. "Mom." She kissed my cheek. She smelled like airport, recycled air and hand sanitizer. "This is Nathan. We got married 3 weeks ago." I looked at her. I looked at him. I looked at the suitcases sitting on my front path. I smiled. I said nothing. Nathan put out his hand. His handshake was firm in the way that men practice being firm. "Great place," he said, glancing past me into the hallway. "Celeste said it was nice. She undersold it." I said, "Come in," because I am 54 years old and I was raised to say come in. And because my brain needed a few minutes to catch up with what was happening. They were married 3 weeks ago. I hadn't been invited. I hadn't been told. I hadn't even known there was a Nathan until 30 seconds ago, and now he was standing in my front hall in Oakville, Ontario, complimenting my crown molding and setting his duffel bag down on my hardwood floors like he intended to keep it there. I made tea. It's what I do when I don't know what else to do. I put the kettle on and I stood at the counter with my back to them for a moment, just breathing. Through the window above the sink I could see my backyard. The garden I'd spent all summer on. The Japanese maple I planted the year my husband Gerald left. The deck I'd refinished myself last spring. My house, my life. 14 years of building something on my own after everything fell apart. I turned around and put the mugs on the table. "So," I said, "tell me." Celeste wrapped both hands around her mug. She was 28. She had her father's eyes and, lately, his habit of making decisions and informing people afterward rather than asking. "It was a small ceremony," she said, "very last minute. We didn't want a fuss. I'm your mother." "I know, Mom. I'm not a fuss." She looked at Nathan. He looked at his tea. "It happened really fast," she said. "We'll do a party later when things settle." I wanted to ask what things were going to settle, and what things exactly, and why 3 suitcases. Instead I said, "Where are you living now?" Because Celeste had been renting a condo in Hamilton. Last I knew. She and Nathan exchanged a look. The kind of look that has a whole conversation in it. "That's actually something we wanted to talk to you about," Celeste said. I waited. "Nathan's between projects right now. He does real estate consulting. And my lease is up at the end of October. We were thinking." She paused. "It would just be for a few weeks. Maybe 2 months tops, just while we sort out next steps." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a squirrel ran across the deck railing. I looked at Nathan. He was looking around the kitchen with a small, evaluating smile. His eyes moved to the ceiling, then to the window, then to the door that leads to the basement. I smiled. I said nothing. The first morning, I woke up at my usual time, 6:15, and came downstairs to find Nathan already in my kitchen. He was in a dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, standing in front of my open refrigerator like he was browsing a store. He'd moved the orange juice from the door shelf to the main shelf. He'd opened a new package of my smoked salmon, the good one from the Scottish deli on Lakeshore that I buy as a treat for myself, and made himself a plate. "Morning," he said, without looking up. "You have any proper coffee? Not the pods. Like ground coffee or a French press?" "I have an espresso machine that I love." I looked at it. I looked at him. "Top cabinet," I said. "There might be some ground coffee from Christmas. You don't use a French press." It wasn't a question. "I don't." He made a small sound, not quite dismissive but not quite not. He found the Christmas coffee. a bag of Colombian dark roast, still sealed, and started opening it. That was my Christmas coffee. I made myself an espresso and sat at the table with my crossword. "I'll need a key," he said while the kettle heated. "Celeste has hers, but I'll need my own, in case we're not coming and going at the same time." "I'll think about it," I said. He turned around and looked at me. Just for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes, an assessment, a recalculation. Then he smiled. "Of course," he said. "No rush." I went back to my crossword. 7 across, one who calculates worth. I wrote an appraiser. Celeste came down around 9. She poured herself a coffee. Nathan's French press coffee from my Christmas bag, and sat across from me. "Did Nathan talk to you this morning?" she asked. "A little. He keeps really early hours. For work. He said he'd try not to disturb you." I looked at the smoked salmon plate, still sitting on the counter. "Half eaten." "He was fine," I said. Celeste nodded. She looked relieved in a way that made me uneasy. Relieved, like someone who'd been worried about a conversation and felt it had gone better than expected. Like I was a variable she'd been anxious about. "This is really great of you, Mom," she said. "Honestly." "I know it's a lot," I said. She stopped. I held her gaze. I kept my voice even. "You didn't call ahead. You didn't ask, you arrived." Celeste set her mug down. "I knew you wouldn't say no. Did you?" The silence stretched. Outside, Nathan's rental car was still in my driveway. I'd noticed it wasn't a cheap car. And yet the lease was up on the Hamilton condo, and the real estate consulting was between projects, and here they were. Celeste reached across and put her hand over mine. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have called. I really am sorry about that." She meant it. I could tell she meant it. And I loved her. I have loved her since the moment she was born on a February night in 1996 at Credit Valley Hospital. This furious, pink, impossible creature who grabbed my finger and didn't let go. I turned my hand over and squeezed hers. But I watched. Nathan had opinions about everything. He had opinions about my thermostat setting, too warm. Though I'm 54 and my body temperature regulation has its own agenda. He had opinions about the order of items in the recycling bins. On their third day, I came home from my book club to find he'd rearranged my living room furniture. Because the couch blocked the natural flow from the front hall to the kitchen. My Gerald-era armchair, the one I'd kept because I finally learned to read in it, alone and quiet, was pushed against the wall at an angle that made no sense. I moved it back the next morning. He moved it again the following afternoon. I moved it back that evening. We did this 3 times without ever acknowledging it out loud. I smiled. I said nothing. On day 5, Nathan walked through my backyard with his phone out, taking photographs. At first I thought he was photographing the garden, the way visitors sometimes do. My garden is genuinely lovely. But he wasn't looking at the garden. He was walking the perimeter, pausing at the property lines, photographing the fence, the garage, the gate. I watched from the kitchen window. He came back inside and sat at my kitchen table with his laptop. He stayed there for 2 hours. When I walked past, I could see real estate listings on the screen. Not Hamilton, not apartments, detached houses. In Oakville. I made a cup of tea and went to sit in my Gerald-era armchair and think. The conversation happened on a Wednesday evening, just over a week into their stay. I'd made dinner. Roast chicken, roasted root vegetables, the good baguette from the bakery 2 blocks away. I do this because I like to cook, not because I was auditioning for a position. We ate, and the wine was poured, and Nathan had a way of settling into a meal that made it feel like a boardroom. "Can I ask you something?" he said, cutting into a potato. "And feel free to tell me if it's none of my business." I looked at him over my wine glass. "What did you pay for this place? The house?" "Yeah, rough figure. I'm just curious from a market perspective. I work in real estate, so I always like to get a sense of what things are going for in different neighborhoods," I said. "I'd rather not say." "Totally fair." He nodded. "I can probably find it anyway. Sales records are public in Ontario. I just thought it'd be easier to ask." He smiled. "What is it, 1,200 square feet? 14? 1,600, I said before I caught myself. He nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something. "Lot size, Nathan." Celeste put her hand on his arm. "I'm just asking," he said. "It's fine," I told Celeste. To Nathan I said, "Why do you want to know?" He leaned back in his chair. He had the look of a man who'd been waiting for this moment, who'd rehearsed it enough that he felt comfortable. "I'll be honest," he said. "I've been thinking about this area. The market here is strong. Detached homes in Oakville proper, especially on these mature lots, are holding well even with the rate environment, and I was thinking. He glanced at Celeste. You're here alone, big house just for one person. The maintenance must be a lot. I manage fine. Of course you do, but I was thinking, what if we looked at this from a different angle? What if you sold this place, took the equity, which would be substantial, I promise you, and moved into something smaller, a condo maybe closer to services, and Celeste and I could help you, Sis said quickly. Too quickly. She'd practiced this part too. Take on a property in the area, Nathan finished. Something with the kind of space we'd need if we're thinking about starting a family. And you'd have liquidity. Real liquidity. At 54, having that kind of cash working for you in the market with a financial advisor, you could. Nathan, I said. He stopped. This is my home, I said. I planted every plant in that backyard. I refinished that deck myself. I have a mortgage that I am 8 years from paying off. I set my fork down. I'm 54, not 84. I don't need liquidity. I need to live in my house. He held up his hands. Totally understand, just thinking out loud. Celeste was looking at the tablecloth. I picked up my fork. More chicken? I smiled. I said nothing more about it, but that night I made 2 phone calls. The first call was to my friend Harriet, who is a real estate lawyer, and has been my closest friend since we were raising toddlers at the same Halton Region playgroup in the late 90s. I told her what Nathan had said. She was quiet for a moment. How much does Celeste know about his business? She asked. Not much, I think. She said he does consulting. I've never seen him consult. Has he given you any documents? Anything to sign? Not yet. If he does, anything, even something that looks innocent, a liability waiver, a shared expense agreement, anything. You call me before you touch a pen, I know. And Judith, she said. Judith is my name. I've been Judith for 54 years and I intend to stay that way. You might want to make sure the title on that house is airtight. Talk to your mortgage broker, and maybe have a conversation with your bank. I'd already been thinking the same thing. The second call was to my mortgage broker, Ian, who I've worked with since I bought the house. He walked me through everything. The title was in my name alone. There was no way for Nathan to leverage the property without my signature. But Ian suggested something additional. A note on the file, a flag with my lawyer, a paper trail of my intentions regarding the property. Just as a precaution. I lay in bed that night and listened to the house settle around me. I thought about Gerald leaving. I thought about the years after. Learning to stop expecting someone else to make decisions. I thought about how long it took to trust my own judgment again. I thought about Celeste as a little girl, climbing into this bed during thunderstorms, tucking herself under my arm. I thought about what I would do in the morning. The next morning I was up at 6:15, same as always. Nathan came down at 7. He seemed surprised to find me at the table with my crossword and a fresh pot of tea already made. He poured himself a coffee. The Colombian dark roast was almost gone by now, and sat across from me. About last night, he said. I hope I didn't overstep. You did, I said pleasantly, but I appreciate you saying so. He was quiet for a moment. I just want you to know, the intention was good. I worry about Celeste's family, that's all. I want to make sure everyone's taken care of. I looked at him over my mug. He was smooth, I'll give him that. He was very, very smooth. How long have you known Celeste? I asked. 6 months. And you were married 3 weeks ago. When it's right, it's right. I nodded. What was the real estate consulting project you just finished? The one before this one? Something shifted behind his eyes. Just a flicker. A development project. Up north. Didn't go the direction we hoped. We're up north. Muskoka area. Which municipality? He smiled at me. Why do you ask? I'm just curious, I said. I used exactly the words he'd used the night before. From a market perspective. We looked at each other. The kitchen was very quiet. I'm going to head out today, he said, after a moment. Do some networking. Of course, I said. The key I mentioned, I've thought about it, and I won't be making a copy. You'll need to coordinate with Celeste, he nodded. Once. His jaw was set but his smile was still there. Totally understand, he said. I didn't tell Celeste what I'd found right away. I needed to know what I was looking at first. I had a nephew, my sister Joan's youngest, who worked in corporate finance and had access to various professional databases. I asked him, carefully, without alarming him, to look up Nathan's business history. Full name, Nathan Aldridge. Company registrations, directorships. Any public filings in Ontario or BC. It took my nephew 48 hours. What came back was not nothing, but it wasn't quite something either. It was the shape of something. Nathan had incorporated 2 companies in the past 6 years. One had been dissolved in 2021. The other was still registered but had no financial filings. There had been a civil matter, not a criminal one, nothing that would show up in a basic search, in BC in 2022. A dispute with a business partner involving an investment property. Settled out of court. Settled out of court is a phrase that can mean many things. Sometimes it means both parties were reasonable. Sometimes it means someone had reasons not to want a judge looking too carefully. I called Harriet again. She'd some calls. The picture she assembled, from what she could access legitimately, was of a man who was good at being in the right room, good at identifying assets, and not particularly good at following through on the business cases he pitched. He's not necessarily criminal, Harriet said carefully, but he is the kind of person who marries into situations. I sat with that for a day. Celeste and I had our talk on a Sunday afternoon. Nathan had gone out. He went out most afternoons now, sometimes returning in good spirits, sometimes not, always vague about what he'd actually done. I asked Celeste to sit with me in the backyard. It was a cool afternoon, properly October now, and I'd put out the wool blanket I keep on the garden bench. We wrapped ourselves up and I handed her a mug of cider, the hot kind with cinnamon, the kind I used to make for her after skating when she was small. She knew something was coming. She had her father's eyes and his ability to read a room, even when she didn't want to. I need to tell you some things, I said. And I need you to hear me out before you say anything. She nodded. I told her what I knew. I didn't dramatize, I didn't accuse. I laid it out like facts. The company registrations, the dissolved business, the BC matter, his interest in my property, the questions about the sale, the photographs of the perimeter. I told her about my calls with Harriet and Ian. I told her the title was secure, and that nothing would change hands without my full and considered consent, which I was not going to give. Celeste was very still through all of it. When I finished, she said, "How long have you known?" I started looking the morning after the dinner conversation. She was quiet. I didn't know about BC, I believe you. I knew about the dissolved company. He said it was a partnership that didn't work out. That might be true, I said. But Celeste, look at the pattern. 6 months, quick marriage. First major visit is to my house with luggage. He starts talking about my real estate within a week. She looked at her cider, her jaw was tight. She had her father's jaw when she was angry, Gerald's jaw, which I used to find attractive before I understood what it meant in practice, that particular kind of tightening. I love him, she said. Quietly. I know, sweetheart. I know that's not enough of an answer. It's not nothing, I said. It's just not everything. She was quiet for a long time. The October light was doing that particular thing it does on late afternoons in southern Ontario, going gold and low and a little melancholy. Somewhere down the street a neighbor was blowing leaves. What do you want to happen? She asked. I want you to ask him about BC's, I said, directly, and I want you to watch how he answers. Not what he says, how he answers, and then I want you to trust yourself. You are the smartest person in most rooms you walk into. I have known that about you since you were 4 years old. She looked up at me. You knew something was off, I said. Before you came here, you knew, and you came here anyway, and maybe part of why you came here is because some part of you wanted another pair of eyes. She didn't deny it. I reached over and tucked the blanket more firmly around her shoulders, the way I used to tuck her in when she was very small and the world was a manageable size. Whatever you decide, I said. I'm your mother. That part doesn't come with conditions. She talked to Nathan that evening. I made myself scarce. I went to Harriet's for dinner as we'd planned. When I came back at 9:30, the house was quiet. Celeste was in the kitchen, alone. She had a glass of red wine and the look of someone who has just swum a very long distance and reached the shore and isn't entirely sure how they feel about solid ground. He's at a hotel, she said. I sat across from her. I asked him about BC, she said. He did the thing where he turns it into a question about my trust in him, about whether I believed in us. He didn't answer the question, he deflected it 4 times. She looked at me. I counted. What did you say? I said I needed some space to think. He said if I needed space that was a problem. She took a sip of wine. He's at a Holiday Inn on the QEW. I nodded. "Mom," she said, "yes, I think I made a mistake." I reached across the table and put my hand over That's not the same thing as your life being over, I said. You're 28. You're in Ontario, you have options, I paused. And you have a mother who happens to know a very good family lawyer. Celeste laughed. It was a small sound, but it was real. Harriet, Harriet. She turned her hand over and held mine. "I'm sorry I didn't invite you to the wedding." "You weren't ready to invite me," I said. "Because you knew what I'd see." She didn't deny that either. We sat there for a while, in my kitchen, in my house, in the city I'd chosen and stayed in and built a life in, with the October wind starting up outside and the maple leaves coming down against the windows, and my daughter's hand in mine. The weeks that followed were not simple. They rarely are. Celeste stayed with me for another month, and it was a different month than the one that had started it. She met with Harriet, who connected her with a colleague in family law. Because the marriage had been so recent and there were no shared assets, no shared property, no children, the legal situation was more straightforward than these things sometimes are. Nathan did not contest. He had other calculations to make. He did send one email. To me, not to Celeste. It was 2 sentences. The first said that he hoped we could be civil, given that Celeste would always be our connection. The second said that he hoped I understood that the Oakville property market was going to be very active in the spring, and that if I ever wanted a professional opinion on my options, he was available. I didn't respond. I forwarded it to Harriet and Ian for their files, just as a precaution. Celeste moved back to Hamilton in November. She found a new apartment, smaller than the old one, but with a view of the bay that she sent me photographs of on a gray Tuesday morning and I thought looked genuinely beautiful. She called, after that, more than she had before. I don't think Nathan made her a worse person. I think he made her a frightened one for a while. And frightened people sometimes make fast decisions and arrive on their mother's doorstep with 3 pieces of luggage and a stranger they've promised their future to. I know something about making fast decisions when you're frightened. I know something about not seeing clearly when you want so badly to believe in something. I was 39 when I finally understood what Gerald was doing with our money, and with his time, and with the truth. I was 40 when I sat in this same kitchen, different furniture, same floor, same window above the sink, and decided what I was going to do next. You build slowly after something like that. You get very careful about what you protect and what you let through the door. I refinished my deck in the spring. Nathan was right about one thing. The Oakville market was active. My neighbor 2 doors down sold for $300,000 over askings, and everyone on the street talked about it for a week. I made myself an espresso and sat in my garden and thought about nothing in particular. Celeste called that evening. She'd gotten a promotion. She wanted to know if she could come for Thanksgiving. She asked if she could bring a friend, a colleague from work, a woman named Bex who Celeste said was genuinely funny and liked to cook. "Come for the whole weekend," I said. I bought the good smoked salmon from the Scottish deli. I made sure there was enough. This time I looked forward to the car in the driveway.